It's a risky investment. If you put your money into private equity, it's not like investing in the stock market.
If there is any return, you only get the money back if there is any return.
You may never get your money back if it doesn't work out. The unique thing about the private equity industry, or the private equity asset, is the difference between a top quartile manager and a bottom quartile manager can be huge.
Is it about the experience or is it about being lucky?
Yeah, it's about both.
And how do you become lucky? How do you plan your luck?
By my luck of riding the wave going in the right direction for me. Scratching around for excuses, yeah, but it's not me. It's not because I screwed it up. You have to be very careful about claims of returns because they can often be fake.
Average rate of return is same on the emerging and on developed market. Why are people investing on emerging market?
The total size globally of the private equity market is about $10 trillion. Emerging markets, a lot of money will come from the developmental financial institutions. If you've been a fund manager and your fund fails, it's pretty hard, because to get a job, because what do you actually do? Most of them go into some sort of consulting and something like that. Sometimes I work for free because it's a good cause. So you have a kind of mix of things going on. There's a study to be made there. I could do it. Somebody have to pay me to do it, but I could do it.
There will always be demand for money, right? People will always need money to scale, to grow.
Don't deserve to have any finance because they're badly managed or it's a crappy business. So it's a natural selection. If you're a 22-year-old and you're raising some money and you get some money from your uncle and parents, maybe they're not really expecting to get it back. They kind of help you out. So it's an emotional investment.
You just can't say no, maybe. If we have to keep the context of Nepal at the center,
yeah.
Do you think fund managers should be working hard on the entrepreneur side or on the side of people with money?
If you're trying to persuade people to raise a fund, the first question is going to be, well, what kind of investments would I make? So many entrepreneurs who came to him with heart problems because of stress, and he was selling their companies for them.
Gavin, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
And I really appreciate you doing this at this time of a day after most probably a very hectic day of a training. You're still with me doing a podcast. Thank you so much.
Well, you're buying the drinks later.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all right.
So, 40 years in private equity industry.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yes. Well, it wasn't all private equity because most people who work in private equity tend to come in. It tends to be a second career because it sort of works better to be a PE fund manager if you've got some professional baggage from something else before that. So
most probably from finance.
Yeah, it can be from different fields. You could be a former entrepreneur, a former consultant. In my case, I brought in 5 years as a bankruptcy administrator where I learned about companies in difficulty, and 10 years as an investment banker where I learned about transactions and deal making, and then that was relevant to becoming a private equity fund manager afterwards. But the pathway can be different for different people. In some sense, if you have a team, a private equity team, you don't want everybody in the team to be an ex-investment banker. You don't want everybody in the team to be an ex-consultant. You want a kind of blend. Maybe one person's better at analyzing companies strategically, another person's better at number crunching, another person's better at putting the deal together. So you want to sort of balance, and so people can come in from different walks of life to be a PE manager.
So how did you ended up becoming a fund manager?
Well, basically what happened, I was, when I was young, I was in my 20s, I was working for Price Waterhouse in Italy, where I grew up, although I'm British, my parents are British. And I was in the insolvency department of Price Waterhouse, so dealing with troubled companies. And there was this Italian company called Panini, which is quite famous. In many countries, children will buy these stickers of soccer players, or Pokemon cards.
Yeah.
And then they have an album and they stick it in this album.
Yes.
Panini makes those cards and those albums.
Okay.
They're one of the big they kind of invented the soccer card for kids in Italy in the 60s.
Oh.
And it's founded by a couple of brothers. And then this company was bought by a British tycoon called Robert Maxwell back in the 80s. And he ruined the company. The company kind of went into administration. As part of this, all the companies Robert Maxwell went into administration at one point here in the Daily Mirror and other things. And I was appointed the administrator by the court to look after this company, which was in an insolvency administration procedure. In America, it's known as Chapter 11. In the UK, it's called administration. So basically, the company is controlled by somebody appointed by the court who negotiates with all the different creditors and the employees and tries to keep the company together. And I was in charge of this company called Panini. So, and being an administrator of a company in difficulty is a very stressful job. It's pretty much full time. So I spent a good year.
So you used to work for a court?
So I used to work for Pricewaterhouse, an accounting firm. And the accounting firm was appointed by the court to administer this particular company. So it's not the audit side of it; it's the administration side. And many accounting firms have this insolvency practice, and I was part of that. And so I was dealing with this company. It was my main activity. I was 29, and I had to negotiate with the unions. I had to negotiate with the banks who were trying to get their money back. Half the management had gone.
It was already a big company?
It was had about 600 employees. It was
Wow.
based in a city called Modena in northern Italy. It was quite high, so it was a major local employer. So it was a high-profile drama because all the papers it was all in the newspapers. So I kept the company together, tried to keep the unions happy on the employee side, tried to keep the banks happy. There were the local government, the mayor, they were concerned. There was a lot of drama going on. It was a highly stressful job. And then finally, my job was to try and sell the company to somebody who'd be willing to buy it.
Sell to?
And so I did I did some reorganization of the company and did a tender procedure inviting bids to buy the company. And the company was eventually acquired by a private equity firm called Bain Capital through their Milan Italian branch, working with the local Italian publishers as a partnership. And they bought Panini in 1990. It was in 1994, I think they bought it for 15 million euros, which is about $16 million. And they kind of turned it around. They put in new management. And 2 years later, they resold it to Marvel Group for 110 million euros.
Okay.
So they paid 15 and they sold it for 110 after 2 years, having also taken a 15 million dividend. So they made about 10 times their money in 2 years. And the reason I got into private equity was that the person from Bain who was negotiating with me the deal was an Italian guy for their Milan office, and he was actually my age, 29. And after they sold it, he personally made from that very successful transaction 7 million euros personally. And then I realized I was in the wrong business because I just had my fairly shitty salary from Pricewaterhouse. And I had blood, sweat, and tears for a year. This guy spent 2 months doing the deal, and he made 7 million. So I thought, I've got to get into private equity. So that was back in 1994.
1994. Yeah. How long did they hold the company for?
2 years.
2 years.
Well, they made a killing. But to be fair, buying a company in difficulty like that, without any guarantees, not being able to really assess it, you've got to take a leap of faith. There were other private equity funds who were also looking at it because it was a competitive bidding process, but they chickened out, particularly the American firms, because they were frightened of Italy. They thought, Italy, the mafia or something like that. So we're scared. Plus the company's in difficulty. Whereas the Italian PE firm, they said, well, this company is an amazing company, and it's just been run into the ground because of one person's incompetence. If we just fix something, it can bounce back right away because all these kids want to buy soccer cards. That's not changed. And so they thought that the risk was much really less than was apparent. And that's part of a skill of PE fund. You assess the risk better than other people. And they thought, that's great. All the Americans flying into Italy are so scared of Italy, so we don't have to worry about them. So we got a clear field. And good for them, They did well.
So 40 years, do you think you were in the right business?
Well, I mean, I definitely always wanted to get into private equity, and I eventually got into it a few years later.
Were you actively looking for such opportunities?
Well, I went into investment banking after I moved to London from Italy. I was an investment banker, and I always had in the back of my mind and my eye on private equity because I thought it was really nice. Something I really felt I wanted to do. And, some years later I got there in the late 90s. Eventually I got there. So it took me about 10 years of being interested to find the right opportunity. Because a lot of life is being in the right place at the right time. You can be interested, but, you've got to get a break or an opportunity's got to present itself. And it presented itself in 1999. I made the jump and became a fund manager.
Let me ask you a very layman question, because I think private equity, venture capitalists, the investment size is quite booming in Nepal. I think we have seen quite a lot of number of private equity who have received license recently. So
Yeah.
I believe good times for Nepalese entrepreneurs are here. So tell me, how does guide me through what it really means to be a fund manager. How do you raise a fund? And I mean, like, I also read on your LinkedIn bio of how you made 40 plus return on one of your investment. So
One of my funds,
one of your funds.
my
So
second fund, yeah.
if you could guide us through all these basic steps.
Yeah, okay. Well, basically, in order to become a fund manager, you have to be able to, it all starts with the fact that you have to be able to persuade people to give you their money to manage. And that's not easy because people, trust is a very short rope, let's say. And so you have to persuade people to give you money. Obviously, what we're seeing in Nepal is we've got about 20 firms getting a license to be a fund manager, but I think about 3 actually have a significant amount of money. The others all have got the licenses and the paperwork, but they haven't actually got the money yet. So that's they've got to do that, and that's the hardest part of it. So every part of it is reasonably hard, but let's say it all starts. You have to be credible enough that people are willing to entrust their money, to trust you with their money, because it's a risky investment. If you put your money into private equity, you put your money into it, and you have a change of heart, you can't get your money back out. It's not like investing in the stock market and you have a change of heart and you sell the shares and get your money back, maybe at a profit, maybe at a loss. Private equity, you commit the money and you're in for the life of the fund, which could be 7 years, 10 years, and you have no way of getting out. You can't say, I'd like my money back. So I'm sorry, you've signed the agreements. You get your money back when I've finished investing it, and there's no other way. So there's that.
If there is any return, you only get the money back if there is any
You
return.
may never get your money back if it doesn't work out. So there is that risk.
This is probably the riskiest form of investment.
It is risky. Yeah, it's a
One
very
of
risky
the
form.
most risky.
It is one of the most risky. And how do you mitigate that risk? Well, you have to have a good fund manager, because there's plenty of bad, mediocre fund managers out there. I mean, let me give you an example. In the industry, we like to, when we try to analyze the performance of a fund manager, we divide the fund managers into 4 categories called quartiles. And it's usually, the expression is that, that we have top quartile fund managers, second quartile fund managers, third quartile, and bottom quartile. And the unique thing about the private equity industry, or the private equity asset, is the difference between a top quartile manager and a bottom quartile manager can be huge in terms of return. It can be 20% a year. So a top quartile fund manager might be able to generate a return of 30% a year, and the bottom quartile guy may be at 0 or minus. So there's this huge spread between the top guys and the bottom guys. Whereas if you take people who, say, manage a fund of government bond fund, the difference between the top quartile and the bottom quartile might be just be 2 or 3%. So that's one of the unique things about private equities, is the huge difference between the very good ones and the really bad managers.
So what does
But the problem is it's hard to figure out who's good and who's bad, because both of them can buy a nice suit and be smooth talkers, but one is awful. But you have to figure it out. You have to sort of see through the suit and the slick speech.
So is it about the experience, or is it about being lucky? Because before we
It's
started the
about
podcast,
it's about both. And the problem is, how do you figure out what percentage is which?
and
That's
how do you become lucky? How do you plan your luck?
Well, some people say you make your luck, but not always. I mean, you just catch the moment. Like this second fund of mine, it was a $200 million fund.
The one where you made 40%.
The one I made 40%. The fund made 40%, 42%, I think it to be. And
That's huge, no? I mean, like, that's pretty...
it's a very good return. It's a very good return. And the fund
not
was
normal.
Well, let me tell you the story. The fund was $200 million, and the fund was started to invest in around the year 2000, 2001, 2002. Started to invest in 2002. Made a bunch of investments in banks, cable television, breweries, logistics companies, various. Had a portfolio of investments. And we started to sell the investments in 2005, 6, 7, and liquidated all the investments and made very good returns on all things. And we invested in companies in Central Europe, South Central Europe to be exact. So, And what was going on in Central Europe at the time was they were joining the European Union. And that the effect of joining the European Union was lifting up these countries' economies, and they were having a boom. And we invested before they joined, and just before they were beginning to join. So we invest, they start to join the EU, their economies lift up, and there's much more interest in the companies. People want to buy there because it's the European Union, there's less risk, and then we sold. So we caught the rising tide, as it were. So my 40% return, if I'm going to be honest about it, and I'd like to be honest, it consists partly of my skill of choosing the right investments, and partly by my luck of riding the wave going in the right direction for me. I think Warren Buffett said is that it's only when the tide withdraws that you see who's not wearing pants. Okay. So the real test of fund managers is when it's the bad times, if you're going to still manage to do something. So my fund, that 40%, 42%, part of it was my skill, and part of it was the rising tide. And who am I to blow against the wind, as Paul Simon's song goes? I can't really tell you how much of that 42 is the luck and how much is my skill. Obviously, if I'm trying to sell something to somebody, I'm going to say, yeah, it was 5% my luck and 38% my skill. But if I'm, more honest, it's probably less, So, but I can't tell you what. But I do admit that luck plays a part, even in the investments. So that's it was a good result, but we had a good headwind as part of it. There's no denying that. But I mean, usually the usual formula is that with fund managers, particularly the ones that are, I think the best fund managers, tend to be a bit more modest and low key. But I would say that a lot of fund managers, if it's the fund is successful, it's my vision, my skill. If the fund fails, it's the market, the tsunami, Corona, geopolitics, Ukraine, scratching around for excuses. Yeah, but it's not me. It's not because I screwed it up. Yeah.
Have you screwed it up in the past?
Yes. Yeah, I have, because if you were to ask me, have you ever screwed up an investment? I said, never. Nobody's going to believe you. So you might as well come clean. So I do. Yeah, I've screwed up a couple. One of which was a personal investment. I invested in a media company, and made some mistakes with the entrepreneur. I backed the wrong guy. We did an international expansion that was badly thought through. I'm to blame for it as well. So it happens. Yeah.
I got my real answer now. I asked you an hour before why, after 40 years of investment in this industry, why are you not putting your private money on equity, bought in bonds? And now you're telling me you have fucked up your private money on bad investment.
But I've had some good ones as well. Yeah, once, yes, and I've the money I was managing. You're always going to have a couple of mediocre investments, meaning. I think some of the ones that were not as good, we got maybe a return of 12% or 18, 19. But on average, I wouldn't say I've got a bad track record. I mean, one of the things you have to do as a fund manager in order to persuade people to invest with you, you've got to have a very careful file where you document all your past investments and show exactly what you paid and how they did and the performance, and you have to document it so that you can substantiate your claims. So every fund manager will have a file. I mean, I've got this Dropbox folder where I've got all my past investments with details and proof of it, things like that.
I'm really curious. I mean, what's the standard rate of return in developed market and in emerging market?
So the average, working out how well private does an asset class is a bit of a mystery, because you get so many competing claims. But because I teach it, I check all the research, which some fund managers don't do, which an academic might do. So I read all the academic papers, I follow it. So more or less, on average, private equity, the long-term return of private equity on average, it depends if it's dollar or euro, but is something around 10 to 12% a year. That's the average return of a private equity investment.
In developed markets?
In developed markets. And then emerging markets, wait for it, it's the same. The average return, we weren't so sure 10, 15 years ago, but there's a lot more statistics about emerging markets now. It's pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same return, 10 to 12%. Now, what's the difference is that you sometimes read all these articles in social media that private equity is returning 30%, 40%. Now, often it's because some funds, particularly the very large mega funds, have a way of boosting their returns artificially. So you have to be very careful about claims of returns because they can often be fake. And you have to look to the academics to get the truth, because if you look to the industry, you'll get a lot of inflated claims, and they cook the books and they put it in the small print. But the average return on private equity has been 10-12%, or more or less the same as the stock market. More or less the same as stock market returns. So it's not that if you invest in private equity just to get the average return, in some sense it's not really make it worthwhile. It only makes sense if you can get those top managers, because that's the average, right? So the average is 10, but the top manager will be getting 25, and the awful guy will be about minus 10, losing all your money for you. And so it's really about getting that manager who's good. So that and the industry to some extent recognises. So it's not about getting the average return, although it's a decent return. You know, if you're a big institutional investor and your private equity portfolio gets you that return, for example, I know that some big groups, their portfolio returns on average these numbers I've indicated. But if they were to put it in government bonds, they might get 2 or 3% in developed markets. So they're getting 7 or 8% better than government bonds. So it's not a disaster. It's more or less similar to the stock market. So, but a lot of so it's not a disaster. But the thing is, you've got to get the right fund manager in your portfolio.
But if the average rate of return is same on the emerging and on developed market, why are people investing on emerging market?
It's a good question. Well, I mean, a lot of investors say that's right. I mean, a lot of investors in private equity don't do emerging markets. They say it's not worth my while. It's harder to understand. There's less fund managers around. They're less skilled. There's not so many fund managers to choose from. So why should I bother with emerging markets? And many don't. But then you'll have a lot of investors who say, well, I have a certain vocation for emerging markets. Or some of them will say, look, let's not be so binary about it. I've got an investment portfolio of 100. I can put 40 into North America and 40 into Western Europe, but let's put 10% of our portfolio in emerging markets. Let's diversify. Let's give it a chance. So it's never as binary as that. And you'll get some investors they'll have a specific vocation for emerging markets. Some investors, well, they'll say that they'll say to their own investors, they'll say, I'm a specialist in emerging markets. That's what I do.
Okay.
So they'll be logical candidates. So there'll be some investors that don't do it. There'll be some that allocate some of their money to it, and there'll be some that have it as a vocation. And so if you add it all up, hopefully it's enough to get the industry going. Because, I mean, just to give you a statistic, Oxford University estimated that the total size globally of the private equity market is about $10 trillion, right? But compare that to the bond market, the global bond market. I forget the exact number, but it was something like $110 trillion is the global bond market, and something like $100 trillion is the global stock market. So private equity is still it's less than a tenth of it's 1/10 of the global bond market. It's 1/10 of the global stock market. So it's still, relative to them, quite a niche. It's still quite a niche, even if it's 10 trillion. And of that 10 trillion, most of that is North America and Western Europe. Maybe 20% of that is emerging markets. And then of emerging markets, you can divide that into 5. You've got emerging Asia, which is about 2/3 of it. 2/3 of the money for emerging markets is emerging Asia. So that's China, India, Southeast Asia, Nepal. Then you've got Africa. That's the second one. The other one is Middle East and North Africa. So Sub-Saharan Africa, then Middle East and North Africa, Latin America.
You'd consider Middle East as emerging market as well?
Yeah, the emerging markets are emerging Asia, the ones I just described, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East and North Africa, because of the cultural language, Arabic fact, that's considered one market, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Central and Eastern Europe. So, maybe Poland's less of an emerging market than it was 20 years ago because it's a full EU country, but countries like Kazakhstan or Armenia or Ukraine are emerging markets. So there's these five regional groupings.
Do you think most of the money that comes into emerging market comes from diasporas?
No, in private equity, most of the money comes from institutions. It's going to be coming from...
Particularly in terms of emerging market. For example...
In emerging markets, a lot of money will come from the developmental financial institutions, such as the World Bank, through their IFC arm, Asian Development Bank, lots of national institutions like British International Investment or the Dutch FMO. So there's a whole collection of these DFIs. And the reason they invest in private equity in emerging markets is because they have another mandate, which is a developmental mandate.
And impact.
Impact. So they don't want to lose their money, obviously they want to make a profit, but they also have the mission to help these countries develop, which a kind of normal pension fund in Milwaukee doesn't have,
Do they have some form of impact index that they have to meet? That's why they send money to emerging market.
I would say that they have a mandate to develop, so they have no business investing in fund managers in France or Canada. They have to target those countries, and their mission is to help those countries develop. And why is private equity a good way to do that, among other things that they do, is because private equity represents a source of long-term capital for SMEs. It encourages entrepreneurship. It encourages other aspects of the capital market to develop, like the stock market or credit markets. For example, a bank will be more interested in lending to an SME with private equity money in it, because that company will have better corporate governance, generally better management, and have a stronger capital, so they're a better client. So it has all these knock-on effects which are positive. So that's why they like to do private equity in emerging markets. And I would say their money is maybe, it's hard to say, there's no reliable studies, but I would estimate about 70 to 80% of all the money going into private equity in emerging markets comes from them. But so the other thing they're keen is that they want to encourage other types of investors to invest alongside them. So if you're a fund manager and you go to a DFI and say, I'd like to raise a fund, can you give me your money? They'll say, okay, yeah, maybe. But if you go to them and say, look, I'd like to raise a fund, but I've managed to persuade a Nepalese private pension funds to invest, a Nepalese bank's going to put something in, some Nepalese diaspora are going to put something in, they'll say, oh, that's interesting, I'll put some money in as well. Because I'll do 80% because you've raised that 20, and that's a good signal, because it shows the Nepalese market the money isn't just this artificial money from a DFI. There's other people putting their money in the fund, so they're very keen to see that happen, because that's also part of their developmental mandate, is to mobilize other investors. Because one day they would like to only put half of them in the fund and have others come in. So they have all these other mandates, which is why they're very active players in the private equity markets.
Do you see a trend, like lately, on a lot of research paper and case studies? Maybe it's one of the mandates. The finance has become more greener. I mean, like you have to put money more into sustainable business, more green money coming in. You have to invest on companies that are more environmentally friendly. Do you see that trend?
Yeah, I mean, it is a big trend.
Seems like most of these trends come from Europe.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these
US.
things. I mean, it comes from Europe and the US. I mean, they have this concept called ESG, environmental, social, and governance, which makes it makes no sense. ESG makes no sense, right? Speaking as a fund manager, it makes no sense whatsoever.
You just made a very bold comment.
Yeah, I'll explain why. It's the problem with the whole ESG and green is it can be good business, but it's also there's ideology, and often ideology, investment business is pragmatic at its best. So you have to be careful about ideology trumping good business judgment. So that's an important thing. And why is ESG doesn't make any sense and people are starting to say that more and more, is that E stands for environment. So that means you invest in a company and you don't want them to pollute. You want them to, you want to not to pollute the atmosphere, not to pollute the roads. You might want them to help reclaim some land. So this is environmental questions. Then G for the governance. Let me go to governance. Governance means the company should have better regular accounts, that you can trust the books of the company.
Timely audited.
That they timely audited, that they have a good reporting system, that they have proper management in place. What's that got to do with emitting fumes and polluting? I mean, that's the kind of an accounting, consulting thing. The environmental thing is you have a guy, somebody who's a botanist or who looks at it's a completely different discipline, right? Environment, it's about measuring air quality, measuring soil quality. You're a kind of geographer. You might be a geologist, you might be an air expert. Governance, you're maybe an accountant. I mean, they're not really related disciplines. And then social is this thing where, you might want gender equality in the management,
more inclusivity
and things like that. Minorities. That's maybe a sociologist's issue, as an anthropologist's issue. What do these three disciplines have in common? Not really, not much. I mean, one's kind of environmental is kind of to do with kind of geology and air quality. The governance is to do with accounting and management. Social is to do with sociology. I mean, they're quite different issues, and lumping them together I think, is a bit confusing. And it can be, and each market, it will be a little bit different.
I think the ESG.
So that's the problem with the ESG, and it is a bit an ideology. It was developed in the West. It has some woke aspects to it. I'm going to be honest. It's a good thing. I think what happened is if you're an emerging markets fund manager and you're investing in companies, way before ESG came along, you're automatically doing ESG because you invested in a company and you say, well, I want this company to be better. So I don't want the company to pollute. I want you to conform with the environmental guidelines. I want you to have audited accounts. I want you to not to hire, everybody because they're from your tribe or something like that. So you automatically are doing ESG without it being an explicit thing. And we've been doing that for years, back in the 90s. And then they come along with ESG and they create these kind of
So you don't like being
off-the-shelf
explicit?
templates. Yeah, explicit means it comes as a top-down thing with templates and model. And you've got a lot of people in the industry whose job's depending on being an ESG expert. And I'm not sure everybody really needs it. We were doing it anyway in a kind of spontaneous bottom-up way, which I always think bottom-up's healthier than top-down. It's helpful. They do publications and it may help to give you a bit of context. But you find yourself, you've been naturally doing it anyway.
But don't you think it's good to be very conscious about to be more investment friendly to the companies that are doing good to the environment, to flowing fund more into investment that are more, let's say renewable energy, more solar, more hydros. Don't you think it's good to be conscious about making more of these investment on these companies who do good for the environment, which means doing good for the community, doing good for the biodiversity?
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, obviously, you also have a duty to give. You're managing other people's money, right? So I'm a fund manager, and I've got in my fund a pension fund. And that pension fund's got to pay their pensioners back wherever. So I do an environmental investment because I love the idea, and it makes me a much lower profit than some other type of investment. And I give less money back to my investors, and they give less money back to their pensioners. But that's an issue. I mean, it's an issue that has to be managed.
But does it have to be less profit? Why can't it be more profit?
Yeah, well, that's what they call the $64,000 question. Is can it make the same profit? And the answer is it depends. Let's look at the evidence. There's a DFI. I won't mention their name because I know that they have a portfolio of what they call commercial fund managers and impact fund managers, and they expect a return of 12% from their commercial fund managers, but 3% from their impact fund managers. So they're only expecting a quarter of the return from their impact fund managers who are doing the kind of things you suggest, which would suggest that they don't really believe you can make the same profit.
But I think that's the problem.
That's the problem because you're in a clash. On the one hand, you want to make good investments that are good, but you don't want your pension to get a lower pension because of it. So you have to reconcile the two, and that's not easy to do. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible. I mean, if you do really well, there's enough money for everybody. But still, I think the jury's out a little bit. I think for somebody to go out and just claim now in 2024. Impact investments generate exactly the same return as non-impact is not true. But you've got a lot. When people make claims, they have a personal agenda most of the time. I'm trying to be objective. So I mean, I have managed a green fund. I managed a renewable energy fund. It was 2.5 billion euros, based in Vienna, and we were doing onshore
That's
wind.
Huge.
For doing energy, it's not so huge relatively because we're doing sort of infrastructure. We were doing onshore wind and solar power in Central Europe, and which is a green energy. At the time I was doing it, which was in the period 2010 to 2015, those technologies were still not sufficiently advanced that the cost of producing the energy was low enough to make it economic. So it was still loss making. So you had to get subsidies.
The rate of return was not really good.
The rate of return was well, we were doing okay, but a lot of people who were depending on the rate of return was okay if you got a subsidy from the government. But if they pulled the subsidy, you're in trouble.
Okay.
So the rate of return was there, but there was a subsidy involved. And the idea was that the subsidies would not last forever because then the technology would develop, and eventually the technology would no longer require subsidy because it would be more economic. So, for example, what happened with wind farms is back in 2010, you would have a turbine that would be pylon would have a certain altitude. It would have a small propeller on it, say 0.5 megawatt, and the cost of the energy production would be, let's say, maybe 12 cents a kilowatt hour. The price of electricity in Europe was, say, 7 cents. So your production cost was 5 cents higher than what you could sell it for. So you needed a subsidy to keep going. And then fast forward a few years later to 2019, 18, 20, the turbines were getting bigger and bigger. The propellers were getting bigger and bigger, the engines, and then economies of scale, more efficiency, better technology. You were producing electricity for 5 cents a kilowatt hour. You could sell it for 7. Now the industry's fine. The industry no longer requires subsidies, so it's viable. So I think that's where we are on solar. That's where we are on wind. That's not where we are on every other technology like wave power and some of these more wacky ones. But certainly on onshore wind and solar, it's sustainable because it's also economic.
You just made a very bold comment on this topic, and at this particular point of time, personally, as I consult brand on their branding strategy, I'm trying to consult few brands on how to place them as more of environmental friendly, more sustainable business, and you just said ESG doesn't make sense. That's a bold comment.
Well, I stand by it. People may not agree with me. I like to express my opinion. I don't want to. I don't. I want your viewers to experience. I'm a plain speaking guy. There's other guys who never say what they mean and never mean what they say. I'm not one of them. That's me. Okay, I'm not going to change at 63 years old. So,
yeah. The 3 fund that you managed, did you happen to raise a fund from LPs all by yourself, or was it?
It was a team effort. I mean, usually they're looking for a team. So you have some senior people, you have some mid-ranking people, etc. So it's a team effort, and you have to persuade them. And what's important is your track record, right? So because I raised my second fund, investors know you had a fund before that. They could look at your track record. So for a fund manager, track record is really important.
So how does fund manager actually make money? I mean, like, what's the percentage cut? What's the service fee?
Yeah, I'll explain. So basically, let's say my fund buys a company. We invest in a company, and we invest 70 million, for example. We buy a company. We've invested 70 million to buy 60% of this company, whatever. Okay. And so we then manage the company. We work with the entrepreneur, whatever the ownership structure is. We do our best to develop the company. We put our money into the company. And 5 years later, the company has grown a lot. It's a better company. It's got better accounts. Everything's better. And somebody comes along and buys it from us, and they pay, say, 140 million. Double, for example. So we've made 140 minus 70, we've made 70 million in gain, in profit.
In a matter of 5 years later.
In a matter of 5 years later. Okay. And so the way it works is that of that 70 million, 80% of that 70 million goes to our investors. LPs, and 20% goes to me.
Your GP.
Me, the GP.
You and your team.
So it would be that 20% would then be spread among the team members. So it's a kind of bonus payment. And it's the standard industry is if the profit you make in selling a company, 20% of that is your bonus, and 80% goes to the investors. It's the 80-20 deal. Technically it's more complicated, but that's the essence of it.
In case you made profit out of it, for example, you guys didn't make profit.
So let's say
for a matter of 5 years, you have to make some money. You have to get a salary. So how does that work?
Well, I mean, if I invest 70 and then I sell it for 90, I'm not going to make anything because there are some other refunds you have to clauses and things like that. So I'm just going to basically 5 years of my life and I don't make anything.
You don't even make a salary?
No, I get the salary.
So it's
no matter what.
Or I think I read somewhere 2% of the whole fund goes into an operational cost. Something like that.
No. I mean, you get a management fee, right? So on your fund, you'll get a management fee.
How much is that?
So let's say you have $100 million fund. You'll have typically a management fee of 2%. So you get $2 million a year to manage the fund.
Every year?
Every year.
So next year it becomes 90.
So another 2 million next year and so forth. And then it sort of gets adjusted according to some clauses.
Okay.
So let's not go into that detail. But so that 2 million, I have to pay everybody's salary. I got to pay rent. We got to pay the business trips. So it's like a private equity team is like a small law firm or small consultancy firm. 10 people in an office. They do trips. They have so it's to pay all those overheads, and so that my salary will come with that. And the idea is you don't make a profit from that 2 million. It's supposed to be spent to manage the fund, right? You're not supposed to make a profit from it. I mean, you'll pay the salaries, but it's not. You're not making a profit on that. Maybe some fund managers do with the very large funds. It becomes a large amount of money on the management fee, and the problem is then they're already making so much on the management fee that then they're less incentivized to really make the investments because they're making so much anyway. But if you're an emerging markets fund of $10 million, $50, $100, $200 million, you're not making a profit on your management fees. You're stretched even, to pay. The salaries have to be a bit lower. And so you basically get a salary. If you're a fund manager, you get a salary, and then if things go well with the investments, you get this bonus payment, this 20% bonus payment. So worst case scenario is you get your salary, and then when people realize your fund's failed, you lose your job, and you're out.
And you lose your image.
And it's very hard.
And you belong to a last quartile of
basically,
fund
there is a
manager.
ruthless selection, because if your fund fails, you won't raise another fund, and you'll exit the industry. So you have to go find another job somewhere else.
Fourth quartile of fund manager.
The fourth quartile guys, some of them survive by smooth talk for an amazing. It's amazing how people can survive who are smooth talkers, but eventually it catches up with you. The numbers catch up with you, and basically they exit the industry. I mean, I think it was McKinsey in a study they did. They estimated that there's 6,700 private equity firms globally.
Okay.
And there's always a few hundred a year that fade away. And a few hundred a year that are new firms coming in. So there's a natural selection. But if you've been a fund manager and your fund fails, it's pretty hard, because to get a job, because what do you actually do? Most of them go into some sort of consulting and something like that. I mean, let's say you're a marketing manager of a fruit juice company, you can go work for another fruit juice company, another fruit juice company. If your fund's failed, another fund's not going to hire you. And usually it's a bit of a business that you raise your own fund. It's your business. So that's how it works. There is a natural selection, but you do get a few years before it catches up with you.
It feels like you're running your own startup.
Yeah, it is an entrepreneurial venture.
Are...
Setting up your own fund is an entrepreneurial venture because you try and raise a fund. You've got no guarantee the investors are going to give you their money. You can spend 2 years. You have to spend 2 years persuading investors to give you their money. In the meantime, you've got no income. And then
you manage a team.
You've got to manage a team. So yeah, there is a risk. There is a risk to it.
So 40 years, you mentioned not all the 40 years were in. So how many years of your career was invested on private as a fund manager?
15.
50.
15. 1-5.
So what made you come out of being a fund manager and get yourself into consulting?
Well, the renewable energy fund came to an end for various reasons. Some of them beyond my control.
The situations are always out of your control, right?
No, well, it wasn't to do with the investments themselves were good. It was more to do with that we had a group of investors in our fund, and
the latest one, 2 billion,
and the two largest investors were East European kind of tycoons. But so there was a concern about where their money came from and who they were.
The source of fund.
And all that. But it was supposed to be okay, and then something else emerged about them, and they got arrested.
Oh wow!
And they got taken away to jail and all that. And I thought, well, I don't want to have a reputational problem that my two largest investors have been taken away in handcuffs. It's not good for me, so I resigned. It's just an accident. I mean, it wasn't.
And you never looked back, and you never wanted to start fund manager.
Well, then I mean, obviously, then I might start. I've been in different initiatives, so I say I'm a consultant. I'm also always involved. There's always a fund being raised, right? Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a hit and miss affair. Somebody comes to me and says, "Would you like to join a team? We might raise a fund." I'll say, "Yeah, okay. I'll put my name to it. Let's see if it gets anywhere." Usually it doesn't. That's life. Even if you're a good fund manager with a good track record, so it's not impossible. I'll do a fund. In the meantime, I've quite enjoyed becoming this specialist consultant that I've been since 2015. And I think one of the things I like, there's two things I like about it. One is that if you're a fund manager, you're more or less locked to your fund and your ecosystem. So if you're a fund manager in Nepal, you're going to spend all your time in Nepal doing investments in Nepal. If you're a fund manager doing, let's say, European fruit juice sector, you're going to spend all your life on fruit juice for years. And I'm quite enjoying that. I do an assignment in Nepal. A few weeks ago, I did something in Malta. Before that, I was in Hong Kong. I did something in Jamaica. So I really got a taste for that. So I'm enjoying that, the variety. And the second thing is that you've got to manage, if you're a fund manager, you've got to manage a team. And managing individuals is always a bit of a headache. Someone resigning, someone got a problem, someone's unhappy. And being a free agent, I don't have to do that. So I've got this freedom. And it's part of where you are in your life. Remember, I'm 63, right? So when you're 63, you're supposed to become this kind of guy with the grey hair, who's a chairman, who's not working 12-hour days anymore, all that kind of thing. So I suppose I got to follow that. But I mean, if I became a fund manager again, I probably wouldn't be the guy, the 40-year-old, doing the day-to-day really intense stuff. I might be the guy backing him up a bit. I mean, that's logical, right? At different points of your career and your age. So I've had roles like secondary roles in funds like that, which, let's say it's a non-executive kind of thing. So it's a kind of natural where you are in your life and things like that. And I had a daughter born 3-4 years ago, and I'm enjoying spending time with her. So there's that. I don't want to have to run to the office because there's some problem. So it's a freedom.
So the consulting business rewards as good as the fund manager part of the
Well,
job
it's a different model. I mean, the fund manager, you've got to manage this fund, you've got the management fees, you've got potentially the carried interest, the bonus. Consultant, I get paid sometimes a daily rate. I get paid maybe a fee for results. I sometimes have some stock options. It's a mix. It's a kind of mix. Sometimes I work for free because it's a good cause. So you have a kind of mix of things going on.
Oh. This is your second time in Nepal,
My second time in Nepal.
and both of the time you are here for training a bunch of.
It's
private
been for
equity.
training, yes. I did a training. I've worked closely with my friends from the Nepalese Private Equity Association. Fantastic group of people, really passionate. And last year, I did a short 2-day course for fund managers about private equity topics. And this time it was a 5-day course training people to train people. So a slightly different proposition.
Training the trainers.
So this was training the trainers. Last year was training.
Oh, how do you see the scene in Nepal growing? Be very blunt and
Yeah, I
honest.
mean, okay. So Nepal is an emerging market country. Its profile is it's a population of about 30 million. Am
Yeah.
I correct? So it's in this kind of range of countries of 25 to 50 million populations.
We
So
got
it's
our rating BB minus.
BB minus.
yesterday.
Yes, I saw that. So it's got that. It's in that population range. So it's not a large country of 100 million plus, and it's not a very small country of 3 to 10. So I'd categorize from a private equity point of view. I'd probably segment countries into those 3 segments: 3 to 10 million countries, 25 to 50 million countries, 100 mega countries. So the 3 to 10 million countries don't have a viable consumer market because they're too small. So they're not going to have their own automobile industry, their own whatever industry. The countries of 25 to 50 have a viable consumer market. So you're going to find lots of industries that are native there. And the mega countries are going to have a chemical industry, an automobile industry, an aviation industry, whatever, which are 25 to 50. So you've got these structural issues. So you fall in that. So if I'm comparing Nepal, it's a middle-income country in the 25 to 50 middle-income range. So what would be a natural comparison? It would be a country with a similar profile. So I could think about Morocco, 40 million people, middle-income country. I could compare it to Romania, 25 million people, middle-income country, EU.
I
And
think
you
our-
can make a list of these of countries.
Our average income is 1,300.
Yeah, based on GDP per capita,
Yeah.
right? You can use an economic measure. And so I would create a peer group. A study could be made. I mean, I'm not going to do that this evening. I need a bit more time to research it. But I would do, I'd look at Morocco, I'd look at Romania. Let me see what else comes to mind. A country with similar population, somewhere in Latin America,
Similar
Argentina.
population and similar.
Yeah, Argentina's 50 million people? I can't remember. Anyway, so I'll take a sample of countries, of populations of 25 to 50 who are middle-income countries, create my sample, then I go and look at their private equity industries and compare Nepal to those, and that would be my appropriate control group. So I don't want to. I'm not going to compare Nepal to, to I don't know
But
to
you
Spain.
don't-
I'm not going to compare Nepal to Spain, which is 40 million, because it's a high income country.
Yeah.
So they have a much bigger industry. So it should be the population, and it's important to compare it to that population, because if I compare Nepal to a middle income country with a population of 5 million, it's not appropriate comparison because it's structurally different. So I find these controls. So I've got Morocco, I've got Romania. We can come up with some others later. And then I study those countries and I compare Nepal, and that's the right comparison to make. There's a study to be made there. I could do it. Somebody have to pay me to do it, but I could do it. I have done voluntary studies as for the love of it.
General,
but so that's what I'd look at. But in general, I would say Nepal. I happen to know Romania and Morocco. Their private equity scene behind. I would say they are definitely less developed than. What are the indicators for the development? How many firms are there with money? So in Nepal, we've got 20 private equity firms who've registered. Only 3 have any money. Romania has, I'd say the GDP per capita is probably higher, but it's got 25 million people, so similar. It's got a dozen firms with plenty of money, a dozen, 15 firms. Morocco, a bit less. So compared to their peer group, I would say Morocco is probably in the third quartile. If I then put these countries into a quartiles, I don't know if I got enough, but Morocco is probably second to third quartile. Nepal. So I think there's definitely progress to be made, and there'll be things that need to be done. But it's at an early stage. It was at an early stage some years ago. I would say the development's been quite slow. But there's something there, and a lot of it is going to be the human talent. Are the people there who can, because doing private equity means you've got the people with money there, you've got the companies here who need money, and so there is money there. There are companies there who need money, and it's the fund manager who is the intermediary between the two. He's got to persuade the people with money to put money, and he's got to find the investment opportunities. So it starts with training these to have a sufficient cohort of people skilled enough who can inspire enough confidence among the entrepreneurs who think they're serious and among the investors who will trust their money. So you've got to work on that. It's a bit like an industrial process. There's always a bottleneck. If it's you're making fertilizer, there's always a bottleneck somewhere. And I would say at the moment in Nepal, the bottleneck is the supply of individuals who are qualified to become fund managers. So there may be other bottlenecks, but I think that's what you've got to work on. That's the whole logic of this train the trainer program.
I think there will always be demand for money, right? I mean, like people will always need money to scale, to grow.
SMEs are always going to need money. When you talk about SMEs, they're always saying access to finance by SMEs. They don't have sufficient access to finance. It's always there. And the reason is that a lot of SMEs don't deserve to have any finance because they're badly managed or it's a crappy business. So it's a natural selection. So in an SME says, I can't raise finance. Well, maybe you've got a crappy business. So others may have good businesses, but they can't raise it. But the SMEs, what's your source of finance if you're a company, any company, not just an SME? You've got 3 options. One is you make enough profit that you can reinvest your profits.
So bootstrap.
Bootstrap, or you're doing well, then you're not bootstrapping, you're making a reasonable profit and you can reinvest it rather than take it out, right? And buy a BMW. Instead, you take it out and invest for the future. That's a choice the entrepreneur can make. That's number one. Number 2 is you go and borrow money from the bank. And there is credit available, and maybe it's not available, maybe it's hard to get, and you can complain as the collateral. But that's number 2. Then number 3 is you get equity from a third party. You get people who put it in as equity, and that's the gap, right? That's the gap. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur and you may get equity, maybe you've got a rich uncle. You're doing a startup, and he gives you some money. They call it the 3 Fs. When you start friends, family, and fools. Because, let's face it, if you're a 22-year-old and you're raising some money and you get some money from your uncle and parents, maybe they're not really expecting to get it back. They kind of help you out. So it's an emotional investment.
They just can't say no, maybe.
Yeah, it's an emotional investment, and they can't say no and all that. But once you get more institutional, you've got a venture capital fund, and there's no, it's not friends and family. So they need a good company to invest in. But those are your 3 choices. And so if you're an owner of a company, my first choice is just to reinvest my profits. Then I haven't got the bank on my neck, and I don't have to share the ownership of my company with anyone else. My second choice is borrowing money from the bank. Okay, I owe money to the bank, but it's still all mine, the company. Then my third choice is to give up some ownership. And then that's where, the kind of psychology of the owner comes in, the emotions of the owner. So you might say, well, I'm a pragmatic guy. I can live with that. I can give up 40% of my company, bring in a fund they're going to have their nose in my business. Fair enough. They put their money in. And
Maybe also they
I'm
bring-
psychologically, emotionally ready to do that.
And maybe they also bring some form of
and
strategy.
they can bring in some
Strategy.
know-how over and above the money, so that can help me. Or maybe they can mobilize. They can make the bank more keen to lend to me because they've heard that I've got a partner, a strong partner. So it's a virtuous circle. But then somebody else emotionally might say, well, I like the idea, but then he's just not mentally ready for it, and he just doesn't go through with it because he's just temperamentally not there, and he never does it. And the guy down the road's done it. His competitor down the road's done it. He's given up 40% of his company to fund. His company starts to go up like that. This guy hasn't done it. His company stays like that. And guess what? 5 years down the road, he buys him, or he goes bankrupt. So that's kind of my play. That's my hardball play as a fund manager. I'd go to three entrepreneurs in the same sector. I'd say, look, you're all pretty nice. You've got pluses and minuses. So the first one to get the money is going to grow, and the other two are going to stay behind. So which one is it? And the other guy said, it's bullshit. I'm fine. And so I had that. I had literally my first fund. I had three people doing parcel distribution. And they're all pretty comparable. The guys were and the one guy said, "Yeah, I'm ready to do it emotionally, psychologically. I'm ready to take this plunge. What's it like to have a new guy on the board and all this? I'm scared a bit because I don't know what it really entails, but I'm going to go for it." And what happened? Fast forward 5 years later, the company had quadrupled in size. We had bought one of the other ones, and the other one had gone bankrupt. And so the space. And it could have been the other two. So it's a bit like. Three girls at a dance. The one who's too fussy, the boys ask her to dance, she keeps saying no. Then then she's 35 and she's going to die alone, right? And the other one's got married. So it's a bit like that.
There's a quite. I was reading a couple of articles, and there's I don't know if you call it a mafia culture where you be like, I'm going to give you your 5 billion, and if you don't take it, I'm going to give it to your competitor. What do you want to do? And they be like.
That's kind of what I said on a smaller scale, exactly. Emerging markets kind of level, But yeah, it's a kind of you don't sort of present it like that. But it's just a reality. If the guy gets the resources to grow his company, and the other two don't, that's how it's going to play out. You don't even have to do this kind of hardball tactic. You just visit them. I actually visited them, and then the one that was interested, we just ended up doing the deal with them, and we kind of knew it was going to happen to the other two, and that's how it played out.
Okay. Let me reframe my question.
Yeah.
If we have to keep the context of Nepal at the center,
yeah,
do you think fund managers should be working hard on the entrepreneur side or on the side of people with money?
Well, you basically got to do both, right? Because if you don't raise the money, you don't have a fund. But you've got to find investment opportunities. It's a kind of it's a virtuous circle, because if you're trying to persuade people to raise a fund, the first question is going to be, well, what kind of investments would I make? And you say, well, give me your money and then I'll sort it out. I'll see later. Much more clever. What's much more clever? And this is a part of the fundraising process. You say, well, you know what? I went and visited 10 companies. I explained to them that I'm an aspiring fund manager. I've got no money to give you, but please give me a couple of hours of your time. I'm a credible person. I'm a serious person. So they said, yeah, okay, I'll take you seriously. You haven't got any money, and tell me about your company, what your plans are. And I said, I've talked to these 10 companies. I've talked to the owners. They would be interested in getting an investor. I've done some analysis of these companies. Maybe you can give them a list of the investors. Say, these are their names. Maybe you don't give the name. You say, this is what they do for company. And he says, oh, that's quite interesting. You've made the effort of going to visit 10 companies. You've done some research, and you've presented to me a kind of snapshot of what kind of investment you make. Now, not all I'll give you my money, but you may not make all these 10, because in the meantime, one of them's gone and borrowed money from the bank. In the meantime, the other one's got something else. But also in the meantime, a couple of others may have joined your list. So that's much more credible. But you've got to do this legwork of going to companies with no money. So the guy said, well, why should I even talk to you? You haven't got your fund. Well, you have to spend some personal capital. You've got to be a credible person in the community. And you develop, it's called an indicative pipeline. And you go to the investors with this, and you give them a better sense of what might happen if they give you their money, rather than saying, oh, here I am, give me your money. So there is a kind of a process in doing it successfully.
I was
Even better is you've done the investments in the past. You can give them a list. This is what I did. This is what I sold the company for. That's even stronger, obviously. But then you present both. You present both.
I was expecting a different answer. I thought you'd say, Anup, I know like there are a couple of licensed private equity, but a lot of them don't have money. So maybe the fund managers would have to work harder on the side of raising the money first.
Well, but you've got. I mean, to raise the money, you've got to give the person who you're trying to raise the money from an idea of what you're going to invest. So if you're a fund manager and you say, "Well, I'm going to spend the first couple of years just talking to investors," that's a mistake. You need to be studying your market, because the day you get your money, you've got to be ready to go.
So
If you spend all your time doing that, the day you get your money, then you need another year to study the market, visit the companies. You're lagging. So you've got to do both.
So you think the reason a lot of licensed investors do not have fund yet because they have not done the legwork of going and meeting a lot of different entrepreneurs, a lot of
I
different
don't
investment
know. I haven't.
opportunities?
I mean, I would. I don't know, because I haven't talked about that specific topic. But I think if you're going to increase your chance of success, if you devote, let's say you've got 8 hours a day, you've got your budget, you've got so many hours of the week. You should be spending so much of the week studying the market, visiting companies, and so much of the week dealing with investors.
If you have to divide it into a percentage.
You have to divide it. You have to divide your time.
If you have
If you're
to
spending
take the
100% of the
percentage-
time with investors, you're making a mistake.
So what percentage should a fund manager be investing?
If
I
it's
know there's-
time in the two activities, you mean?
Yeah. I know there is no fixed rule book to that,
I
but
would say it should be 40-60.
40% on...
Well, maybe 1 month is 40 on the companies and the other month is 40 on the investors.
Okay.
Probably never no less than 30. Never no more.
The reason I'm trying to get a specific answer from you is because it's been 5 years that I've been hosting this podcast. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, already 250 plus podcasts I've done. And almost every entrepreneur that I talk to, everybody has need of capital. Of course, all business are looking for capital. And there is a whim that a new wave of private equity venture capitalists has landed here with all this amazing license, but I don't
no
see
money.
no money, and I don't see much investment happening. There is a lot of LOI being written, a lot of letter of intent being written, but I don't see much of investment happening. So I don't know. And so now my follow-up question to you is: do you think for a company, for economy of our size, for a state we are in right now, we need more angel investor, we need more microphones, we need more investment from diaspora, maybe a lot of successful diaspora coming in and becoming angel investor, they investing a little bit of money into a company, growing that company, and then once we have good enough companies with good enough of angel investor, then maybe the need of private equity venture capitalists would come. Are you getting me? Am I being...
Yeah. I mean, it's a progression along. I mean, if a company is
because there are not many angel
yeah,
investors.
I mean, the progression is like this. The company is a pure startup, so it's going to depend on family, friends, and fools, etc.
And these are angel investors.
And then the next stage, the company gets a bit further down the road. The next stage is angel investors who will do smaller amounts. And then the stage beyond that is venture capital funds. So there's a natural progression. The venture capitalists tend not to come in right at the beginning. That's the 3 Fs. So 3 Fs, then the angels, then the VCs.
So do you think a market where we have
And that's the
more
same
VC
everywhere. That's the same everywhere.
And I am assuming right now the state of Nepal is we have more VCs, but we do not have more angel investors. So the chain is broken.
Yes. Many markets you do have gaps along that on the line, because the gap, it would be the 3 Fs, angels, maybe a small developmental fund, then a VC, then another bigger fund. So you fill in the gaps, and many markets will have gaps, and sometimes DFIs and other actors will try and fill these gaps, and you fill the gap. I mean, one of the ways you get angels is you set up angel clubs. Because you can more or less divide an angel investor. Let's say an angel investor is some kind of high net worth individual, basically. A high net worth individual who's got money to invest. It doesn't have to be a multi-billionaire. It could be a wealthy dentist. Yeah. So you divide these angels into two. There's two categories to divide them to. There's the ones with expertise to invest, and the ones with not. So the one with expertise to invest could be, for example, a director of a bank who's got some good personal savings, and he's got some skills to assess companies, or it could be an entrepreneur, or it could be someone in the financial sector. So he's an angel we're talking about his personal money now, and he's got expertise. The non-expert could be something like a wealthy dentist, doctor, something like that, right? Who's doesn't know how to assess companies, but he's got spare money. So you've got to segment those two because you have to treat them differently. And often you'll have these angel clubs where they have a syndicate. They have a syndicate, right?
What do you mean by differently? Differently in terms of rate of return, differently in terms of commitment.
In terms of how you get them to invest.
Okay.
So, like, let me give you an example. You might have an angel club somewhere in the US. So there'll be a club of people, like say 10 individuals who will know each other from the golf course or whatever, or something like, or a club. And then maybe 2 or 3 of them will be the leaders because they have an investment background or they were ex-bankers or something like that. And then 6 or 7 of them, one is a dentist, one is a car salesman, whatever it is, and they will rely on the guys with expertise. So they'll have a system. They say, well, there's 10 of us, and we do it all together, right? So somebody brings us an opportunity to the 10 of us. We're sitting there, they're pitching it. We ask the guys in Oxford, what do you think? We may have some, and so let's say it's a $1 million investment. All of them do 100,000 each. So the dentist will say, well, if he's doing it with his own money, I'm in. Because I'm relying on his expertise. So it's a kind of co-investment dynamic. So he's saying, well, so the guy with the expertise is not a broker telling me it's a great thing, but not putting his money in, which is, he could be bullshitting me, but he's doing 100 and I'm doing 100. So we're in. And so you have these clubs. And that gives it, so instead of having the angels only people with financial expertise, you can include the doctors, dentists, the car salesman, and then you have a bigger pool of capital. But these non-expert angels need the expert angels. So you've got to give some thought how to organize it. It could be an informal club. Sometimes you have actual clubs with memberships. Like in the States, they'll have this club, and then once a month, they'll all get together in a restaurant, have a nice meal together because there's a social element, because they're all kind of, let's say, upper middle class people, so they're quite comfortable with each other. They're all the golf club guys. They've got a nice 2 homes, a BMW, etc. And then, those spy entrepreneurs are lined up. They do a pitch to them, and then they decide if they want to do it. A bit like Shark Tank or that kind of thing, but not so dramatic as it's done on. They obviously dramatize it on TV,
obviously,
more, but something like that. And so. You could do that in Nepal, and that's where the diaspora comes into play.
Let me give you a context so that you can help me better. So, for example, I am sold with an idea that something is broken in investments in Nepal because getting to know a lot of entrepreneurs and having hosted a lot of people from investment ecosystem, I know because I am sold with the fact that the chain is broken because there is no angel investor, there is no investment on ideas, and because if you don't have nursery, how can you expect there to be high school, right? I might be wrong. So what I have been thinking lately is if there could be some form of microfunds between diaspora and people in Nepal, because I was reading this book called Maverick Effect, written by a guy in India, and diaspora plays a big role to grow an economy, right? To grow a home economy. So I'm just thinking out loud, if there could be a way we can connect diaspora with microfunds, maybe a $5,000, maybe a $10,000 to an entrepreneur here in Nepal who might be working, who might be on a day one or might be on a year one of his business. So now this is a context that I'm giving you. This is a completely hypothetical context. Help me guide through it.
Okay, well, I think what you have to do is traditionally a lot of the diaspora they've emigrated, and a lot of the diaspora, they have remittances. And typically the remittances would be back to family members back at home. And typically the diaspora would, if they invest back at home, then they'd buy property typically because they see that as not very risky. They buy
it's
property.
It's like a gift to your family.
Yeah, or you buy a holiday home, or you build a house, and then one day you retire back home. That's quite typical. And so there is that leap to going into investing in companies, because a lot of the diaspora people, some of them may have mixed feelings about their country of origin. They'll say, well, I emigrated to get away from some of this bullshit. Now you're asking me to invest back in this bullshit. I'll buy a flat for my grandmother, but I'm not investing in some funny, I know better. So sometimes you get an ambivalent attitude to the home country.
True.
So that's one aspect to it. And the second aspect to it is you've got to figure out if the diaspora is powerful enough to really play a role. So what you want to do is, and I've worked with diasporas. For example, I was involved in launching a fund in Armenia, which was a big part was funded by Armenian diaspora. So the other thing you have to do is then you have to do a kind of sociological segmentation of the profile of your diaspora. So let me give you an example. The Armenian diaspora, a lot of them in the US. in Western Europe, ultra successful, very powerful, a lot of money, some very big names, very powerful diaspora. So that's one example. Lebanese diaspora, pretty strong. Let's go to the other example, Moldova, small European country based between Romania and Ukraine. Moldovan diaspora are typically babysitters, cooks, cleaners, electricians. These guys, they're not people who are they're going to send a little bit of money home to their relatives. They might buy themselves a little apartment over a few years, but they're not going to be putting money into private equity.
They don't really have that disposable
income. They don't have that disposable income. So another diaspora could be, for example, or it could be more complex, like the Serbian diaspora. You have the first wave of diaspora from the 90s after the Second World War, who were traditionally immigrants who did humble jobs. So they were doing cleaners, industrial workers, and then you had a second wave of diaspora who were escaping from the nationalism of the 90s, who were engineers, scientists, who are high powered. So then it gets so you've got to analyze your diaspora. For example, our Albania, a small European country, they actually have a minister for diaspora.
Wow.
The job of that minister is to do what stuff I'm talking about. Figure out where the diaspora is. Figure out the ones that are successful. I mean, not to neglect the ones that aren't successful, but try and have a strategy for your diaspora depending on their profile, their social, and harness it. So they have a minister to do that. And I've done quite a lot of work with diaspora because there is this intersection between the diaspora and private equity and venture capital. It takes the form of angel clubs, it takes the form of remittances. So you've got to do your analysis, and somebody's got to go out and figure out who the Nepalese diaspora are, how many they are, where are they, what are they?
What's the number they can sign?
What's their socio-economic level?
What's the ticket size they are willing to sign?
Yeah, so the higher the socio-economic level, the more there's a Nepalese guy somewhere in Brisbane who's done really well as a dentist. He's bought some flats for his relatives. He's done that, and he's thinking, well, I got $50,000 a year to play with. Maybe I can have a flutter on some startups if I come back for a visit one year. Let me look into it. It can happen. So somebody's got to harness that. I think it requires somebody to mobilize it. Well, it could be someone. You do get some people who diaspora members themselves who try and put clubs together and do something like that. But it does require some proactive harnessing, some analysis and proactive harnessing. So there's a job there to be done. It's not going to just. And I think the idea you could set up a platform, and that could be an idea because. You could set up a platform and then just ask people to do small amounts of money, like crowdfunding. So you could get a diaspora people to do 5,000 rather than 50. That's going to be a whole lot more of them, right?
No, in fact,
but yeah. So there is. I think with crowdfunding platforms, you've opened up the possibility to access a diaspora that's not the 50,000 a year guys, but more of somebody who's got 3,000-4,000 a year to play around with.
And this question is a very personal question because lately I've been getting messages on my WhatsApp from Nepalese people living abroad, and they're willing to sign $5,000 to $10,000 a year if I can connect them with a good entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I feel like, okay, if one guy is willing to write $10,000, maybe there could be 10 other people who are willing to write $10,000. Now it's $100,000.
Because they're coming out the woodwork. It's spontaneous. So if you had a structure,
exactly,
and I'm sure it could be harnessed. So exactly. There is that's a job to be done.
And now what I'm thinking is, instead of me connecting this one guy with $10,000 to an entrepreneur, how about we made a group or club where we bring in 10 people who can write $10,000, it becomes $100,000.
Oh yeah, that changes the equation because doing a little investment, $10,000 in a small entrepreneur is much more risky than doing $100,000 one that's already a bit better.
Exactly.
So if you can do, and the work is the same. You have to go and analyze 10 companies instead of one. Exactly. So there is the economies of scale argument. So definitely that's good. You may have the odd investment that's smaller. It could be some, but that makes a lot of sense. But there's work to be. You have to sort of organize it.
True. And on my part, because the process of podcasting is, I invest quite an amount of, like for example, with you, we sat for a couple of hours, we drank some good beers and had great conversation, and then we are here on our podcast, right? So
with no beers yet.
Yeah. So most of my guests are entrepreneurs who I get to hang out with, and I get to a degree, I even get to know their P&L. So I know if they are profitable or if they are in loss. So I'm just thinking out loud, nothing in particular in my head, no framework. But after meeting you, and all these things are getting connected, and I'm just asking you a very personal question, but I think I got my answer.
Okay.
Great.
No, I think connecting people, because relationships are important in business. There's no doubt. It's always more personal, people say. So if you're getting contacted by people who have money and you're meeting people who are entrepreneurs, you're part of that process. You know, that process between capital and entrepreneurs. And you don't have to be a financial professional to do it. You're a podcaster. You could be. I remember there was one case in Spain where there was this heart surgeon became an M&A broker because he had so many entrepreneurs who came to him with heart problems because of stress, and he was selling their companies for them.
helping them out.
Yeah, on the side, he started to, and then so you never know how these things can happen. I think with media, these podcasts, you reach such a wide audience.
It's crazy.
There's going to be people out there. There might be a Nepalese out there in Vancouver who says, "Well, I'm at the stage of my life where I wouldn't mind. I could put in 5,000 into something, and there may be plenty of them." Then again, let's do the analysis of the diaspora. How many at what level? Then you can have a bit of an idea. The Albanians have a minister, so they've really got a whole government department doing this stuff,
Very
trying to mobilize. I think that the biggest problem the Albanians had was that a lot of the Albanians with money had made their money not entirely legally, so there was a bit of a problem there. But they had a lot of money, but it wasn't entirely legal. And the other problem was that there was a lot of Albanians had mixed feelings about their home country. They had emigrated because they'd been mistreated by the system, and they were kind of not actually that friendly to investing back. So, but you can navigate your way through that. Not everybody's going to be interested.
True. And I think the media, the power of media is amazing. When I came to your profile and when I saw those videos, I was like, damn, man, this guy is really into something. You have your YouTube channel and you're talking about private equity investing. You have these articles written on LinkedIn.
I do, yeah.
Amazing.
Well, I would say I'm amazing. I have the YouTube channel. I would say I haven't done too badly with social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, considering that I'm Generation X and I'm not a millennial or Gen Z. So for my generations, we're supposed to be dinosaurs, right? I guess I've tried not to be that. So I think it's helped. It's helped. But you've got to have that core of competence.
Man, trust me, I consult a lot of people on their personal branding and content strategy. You have done amazing. I wish a lot of Nepalese investor, a lot of Nepalese private equity would do that, because from one perspective, the reason there are not many good entrepreneurs running business in an audited firm, because they were never told. And I think the power of content is also education, right?
Yeah.
People actually understand how it should be done, they execute it, and they can reach out. I wish a lot of Nepalese investor could learn this thing from you, that it's really important to be vocal. It's really important to share your information publicly. It's really important to go into videos and LinkedIn and talk about what you know, because let the people know, learn from you virtually, and then implement, and then grow, and then maybe connect to you. And again,
there's no harm in reaching out to people. Absolutely.
You're doing
amazing.
amazing.
I think thinking of people my generation. I'm not talking about my parents' generation. My parents, they would have a smartphone. They'd kind of go like that with their finger, and I'd say you have to just softly press the button. It's not working. The phone's something wrong with the phone. No, you just don't know how to use it. I think. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
We were talking about the content side.
Yeah, the content. I think there's nothing wrong with. It's always good to learn new things. It's always good to stretch your mind. I think part of being a good private equity fund manager is to have a mental agility and curiosity and be open to learning, and not thinking you know everything already. I think personally, if I deal with somebody who says I know everything already, there's nothing you can teach me. I'm reluctant to take them seriously, because that's by definition untrue. You can always learn something. And I think we talked about how I set up my YouTube channel. I was stuck at home during COVID. It was pretty quiet. So I just said, well, I know a lot about private equity, and they say that a guy my age is a dinosaur in terms of media and all that and technology. I'm an engineer by training, so I've got that background. But I'm going to go do my YouTube channel, right? Why should it always be a 25-year-old doing it? So I went and did it, and I set up my YouTube channel. I started doing films about private equity, so it's a very narrow specialist channel. It's my niche channel. That's my niche. I want to do it well. And so the first films, I bought myself a camera. You know, I had a light. It was kind of rough. I was holding the light, and it was the shade. So it was really rough, but the content was okay. And then I learned. You know, I bought myself another camera. I figured out that you put it on a tripod, not on some books. I got a better mic, and you know, a couple of years passed, and by the end of it, I had a studio with a green screen, and my videos are getting better and better. And so there's no excuse. Why you can do that in your 50s? Why not?
Exactly. And there is a misconception among people who are doing good. They be like, I am not ready to go out and speak, be vocal about my knowledge because I have not reached where I need to be. And I be like, you don't talk about your knowledge and skill set. You don't advocate yourself because you are successful, but because you want to expedite the process of being successful. You want to do it because it actually expedite the pace of where you want to go. So I think that's the mental shift that people can't really adopt with personal branding, with creating content around their knowledge, because you might get 10 more deals because you're talking about something that a lot of people are not talking about.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with having
Obviously, you
sharing
have to be
information
genuine.
and reaching out. I think there is this kind of mindset that you have. Maybe many people in my generation in finance, this idea that, well, I'm not going to go out and do these podcasts. It's all kind of fluff. You know, the real communications, we have this, the powerful guys have these low key meetings in a cafe. We have these phone calls. We make the real decisions. It's all the kind of bullshit artists who are doing podcasts, but it's because they're not real big players. That's wrong. There's a time to have a confidential conversation about some big amount of money, and there's a time to have a podcast and educate people and talk. You can do both. They're not mutually exclusive. So I think that's wrong, this kind of idea. It's a kind of ego thing, I'd say, to some extent.
Are you aware of A16Z?
Am I what?
Are you aware of A16Z?
A60?
A16Z.
A16. I've heard of it.
It's a private equity company run by Mark Anderson and Ben Horowitz, one of the most aggressive PEVC in the world.
Oh, one of the Silicon Valley. Yes.
Yeah.
There's so many of them.
They have amazing series of podcasts. They have batches of different podcasts around different industry.
Yeah, I mean, you do have the kind of celebrity investor, you know, the one who's...
Not exactly. I mean, like, they have designed the marketing strategy so well. For example, they have this website called future.com where they talk about all the industry they invest in. So it's like whatever company they invest in, they also give the marketing, they also give the traffic, because they have a very high authority website, a media platform where they talk about the technology. So an entrepreneur who might be raising capital in next 2 years is reading about technology from their website, starting a company, raising fund from them. It's a whole supply
it's
chain.
an innovation in
The way you reach out, the way you
the way.
brand.
So they have a different communication model than the traditional venture capitalists, which is this kind of low key thing. You've got to
Exactly.
find me. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's kind of what I try to do a bit in an amateurish way, not in the professional way like them. And you have to enjoy doing it. You know, it's like anything. You know, maybe there are. I mean, to be fair, there are some investors who, you know, want to keep a really low profile and all
And
that.
that's fine.
That's fine. But as long as you're not blurting out trade secrets, there's nothing wrong with having a podcast with sharing information. You know, it's educational. I think I quite like.
I can
find
see in
you
the
add a lot
videos
of
you're
value.
enjoying it, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice, and you're having an impact on people. That's why I became an emerging markets specialist, because I felt that rather than being one of a 10,000, you know, one of 100 fund managers in the UK all competing for the same deal, if I go to a new market and I bring money, I'm having this impact, ESG impact. Anyway, I'm adding a lot of value. I'm educating the market, so you really feel you're making a difference. So that's partly what drew me to emerging markets.
Thank you so much, Gavin.
All
I
right.
really appreciate you
Yeah,
taking time.
I've enjoyed it. I'd love to come back anytime. Let's do it again.
100%.
Yeah, and we've had a great overview. You know, we could talk about. There's so much you can talk about in this industry. So many things you can dive into detail about. We've only scratched the surface, but I've enjoyed the talk.
And
Yeah,
I'll
thanks.
for a lot of audience who wants to know more about being a fund manager. If you want to be fund manager, I think I link Gavin YouTube channel below. Gavin is pretty active on LinkedIn, so if you have a right approach of approaching people definitely reply. I approached him through LinkedIn.
Yeah,
and
and
he
bear in mind,
responded.
if you want to work in private equity or investments, you don't have to always be the fund manager, the investment person. There's many other jobs there. It could be,
For example?
it could be working on investor relations, working in the back office, helping to support the fund, being a service provider. So there's so many other jobs out there. Not the job of the actual investor, but there's many other jobs. I think a professor at Oxford called Philippe, who did an estimate, there's about 250,000 people globally in private equity, but maybe about 50,000 are the actual fund managers, and the others have many other roles. So there are many other roles you can play, which are very useful and good. Like what I'm doing, I'm not a fund manager right now. I'm a trainer, consultant, expert.
So
I do various things like I help create fund management firms. I write studies on the market for clients. I do training, so that there's so many other things you can do as part of the ecosystem.
So people who are watching this, maybe they are watching it from all over the world. They can reach out to you if they want to start their own private equity venture capitalist firm. One, they can reach out to you if they want their team to get trained from you. What are the other reasons they can reach out to you and
Training, consulting, getting advice, how to set up. I mean, a range of things. I think they can read my LinkedIn profile. I kind of specify the areas. They're welcome to reach out. To me. I always try to respond. I mean, just not kind of serious things. Not saying oh, I've got this dream. Send me $10 million. It's got something of substance.
Exactly.
I try to avoid getting involved in. I don't find money for people. That's not what I do. I provide know-how.
Well, you responded me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I responded. Yes, yeah.
So I think they had definitely.
Well, we were introduced by one of the people. So
Yes,
he
yes.
mentioned it to me, and
Deepak Dai.
I did ask about you. They said you were a good podcaster, so here we are.
Great. This one last question in my mind. If people really want to pursue their career as a fund manager, what would be the right approach? I mean, like, take some couple of online trainings or take some university courses.
Yeah, I mean, you take some courses and build up some experience. I mean, I think just to remind you what I said earlier is that it tends to be a second career. It's unusual. You don't become a fund manager straight out of university. You tend to do a few years of something else that become relevant, and then you maybe transition to becoming a fund manager. The only people who become directly fund manager are the ones who join these big American buyout funds, but that's more like working for an investment bank. So it's a journey you make. But yeah, all those things you mentioned are helpful, but it's a necessary but not sufficient condition.
Okay.
And it may take a while to get there. It took me, from the moment I decided I'd like to do it in the early 90s to when I did it, it took me 10 years. From the moment I decided I'd like to be a fund manager to when I actually got there, it was 10 years. It could be less. I mean, that's how it happened for me, So
Was that the right reason to come into a fund managing, because you saw money, your friend making more money, and you could.
Well, that was the initial stimulus, but really, I mean, it was a considered thing over a year. That was a colourful story. That was one of the stimulus, but it wasn't based just on that. It was based on thinking that I'd like to do it and thinking that I think I'd be quite good at that, and liking the skill set that you apply to it. So it wasn't just based on that one thing. But sure, I mean, 7 million at 29, it's not bad. But it's true. That's what it did happen. But no, it was based on a series of things. It was a considered. I worked as a bankruptcy administrator, investment banker. I knew finance quite well, business, and I thought what's the attraction of being a fund manager? It's you've got a guaranteed salary from the management fees, and you've also got the potential upside if you do a good investment. And if it's your own firm, you're your own boss. So you've got the security of a reasonable salary. It's not, it depends on the salary. You've got a good salary without having a boss to keep happy, and plus the potential of making an upside. So it's pretty good, because usually if you have a fixed salary, you've got a boss, you've got a kind of who's asked you got a kiss or things like that. So it's quite a nice, you've got this independence. You've got the possibility of making. So I've met many investment bankers who'd like to be fund managers. I've met many other professionals who'd like to become private equity fund managers. I have yet to meet a private equity fund manager who'd like to give it up and do something else.
Oh.
Usually it's been if it's been involuntary.
Okay. A follow-up question. What's the difference between being a fund manager who is managing fund of a private limited partner, private fund, versus public money, versus money from endowments, versus money from these developments, DFI?
Well, money is money. So basically, you may have the investor in your fund may be a combination of all these
Okay.
people you say, and They may have their own reasons for investing, particular to them, but at the end of the day, you'll get money from these people and you'll invest it according to your investment strategy. So in a sense, it doesn't matter. But of course, it's good because ultimately, if you're a fund manager, who's your customer? It's not the company you invest in. That's the product you're making. It's the people who give you money. They're your customers. And the product you have to deliver to them is a better company than the one you invested in at the beginning. That's your product. So the company, the entrepreneur, is not your customer. Is your product.
Amazing.
So
I think we'll continue our later half
to
of
be
the podcast
continued.
over an IPA.
Okay, let's go for the IPA. Let's
Yes.
go for the IPA.
Thank you so much for everybody.
you.
Would you like to say anything?
Well, I'd just
ending
like
note?
to reach out to all the Nepalese diaspora out there and the people here, saying I think there's it's baby steps. Sometimes it's one step forward, two steps backward, but we're the journey's there on private equity. It's going to happen. It's we're not sure how quickly, but it is happening. It is happening. There are many things you can do to make it accelerate, and I'm sure there's people working on that as we speak. But it looks promising.
Amazing. And for everybody who's watching this, I think you guys have learned a lot. I have learned a lot. I think being a podcaster, there is a perks that whatever you want to learn, you invite them over a podcast, you get a free consulting.
So you're the Nepalese Joe Rogan.
Maybe not.
No?
I don't make precedents.
Oh, okay. Well, it'll soon.
So for everybody who's watching this far, I think you definitely have got some patience if we have been, our conversation have been able to retain your attention so far. And I think I'm going to link Gavin LinkedIn and YouTube channel below. Please do go through it. Connect him on LinkedIn. Write a good message. I think everybody responds to a good message. And
Sure.
for people who's watching this might look like two people talking in front of a camera, but there are amazing people behind the camera, behind the computer screen, making sure the job is done well, the audio is great, the light is great. I'd like to thank our production company, Viewfinders, which is helping tons of Nepalese brands, both inside and outside Nepal, to activate their social media, to help them with content to grow their sales. So if you want to activate your social media, if you are worried about your sales, if things are not happening, maybe we can help with content strategy. Do reach out. The link is below. I am personally very active on LinkedIn, so you can always reach out to me. I'll be back again with another amazing episode, another amazing guest. Till then, you guys take care. Bye-bye.